The steady rhythm of my life had always been predictable, safe, and utterly dull. The morning coffee, the quiet afternoon spent alone in a house that felt more like a museum of a once passionate love, and the hushed evenings when my husband returned from work too exhausted to notice how empty our conversations had become. I told myself I was happy. After all, wasn't this what every woman wanted? A stable home, a devoted husband, and a routine so meticulously designed that it left no room for chaos. And yet, deep down, I knew something was missing. Then I met him. Or rather, I noticed him. Jacob had always been around, our neighbor's son. But he had grown up, changed, become someone different from the boy who used to ride his bike past my house. Now, at 20, he carried himself with an ease that drew my eyes to him more often than I cared to admit. I don't know when the stolen glances began. Perhaps it was the day I found him fixing his motorcycle in his driveway, his shirt soaked in sweat, revealing the sculpted lines of his body. Or maybe it was the afternoon he offered to help me carry groceries inside, his fingers grazing mine just a second too long. But I do know when it became impossible to ignore. It was a warm evening, the kind that made the air feel thick with possibility. I had stepped outside, needing a moment away from the suffocating silence of my home. And there he was, leaning against his car, his gaze locking onto mine as if he had been waiting for me. "Hey, Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice smooth, confident. "You look different tonight." I felt a blush creep up my neck. Different. He tilted his head, his smile lazy but knowing. "Like you're not really here. Like your mind is somewhere else." I swallowed hard. He wasn't wrong. He took a step closer, and I could smell his cologne, earthy, musky, intoxicating. Need a distraction? I should have turned away. I should have reminded him that I was a married woman, that this was dangerous, that there was a line neither of us should cross. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Maybe." That was all the invitation he needed. The first time he kissed me, it was brief, hesitant, but it sent a wildfire through my veins. It was a taste of something forbidden, and yet I found myself craving more. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments, secret touches, and whispered confessions. We met in places where no one would suspect: his garage, the back corner of the park, even my own kitchen when my husband was away. Each encounter deepened the need, the hunger that had been lying dormant inside me for years. But passion is reckless, and recklessness always has consequences. One evening, as I lay in bed next to my husband, his back turned to me as usual, my phone vibrated. "Jacob, can't stop thinking about you." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. This had gone too far. We had crossed a line neither of us could return from. But as I stared at the message, all I could think about was how alive I felt when I was with him. I typed back a single word: "Come." He didn't hesitate. Minutes later, I heard the quiet knock at the back door. Heart pounding, I crept downstairs, every step echoing the battle raging inside me. When I opened the door, he was there, his expression unreadable, his presence overwhelming. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I pulled him inside anyway. The moment his lips met mine, I knew I was lost. We moved through the house like we belonged to each other, like the consequences didn't exist. His hands traced the curves of my body as if memorizing them, his breath hot against my skin. Then, just as suddenly, everything shattered. The sound of the front door opening, my husband's voice calling my name. Panic gripped me, and I shoved Jacob away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He understood instantly, his body tensing as he darted toward the back door. But it was too late. My husband stood in the hallway, his eyes locking onto mine before shifting to Jacob, who was frozen mid-step. The silence was deafening. "Beth," my husband said, his voice eerily calm. "What the hell is going on?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Jacob straightened, his jaw tight. "I should go." "No," my husband snapped. "Stay." Jacob glanced at me, silently asking if he should fight or flee. I couldn't look at him. "I trusted you," my husband said, his voice breaking. "All these years," I thought. He stopped, running a hand through his hair, his body trembling with anger. How long? Tears burned my eyes. How long, Beth? I couldn't lie. A few months. He let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. And you didn't think I'd find out? Or did you just not care? I cared. Too much. But not in the way he wanted me to. Jacob took a step back. I should go. Yeah, my husband spat. You should. Without another word, Jacob slipped out the door, disappearing into the night. I stood there, my world crumbling around me. My husband turned away, his shoulders slumping. I need to think, he muttered before grabbing his keys and walking out the front door, leaving me alone, with nothing but the echoes of my choices. The days that followed were filled with unbearable silence. My husband avoided me, staying out later than usual. The guilt weighed on me like a crushing force. But beneath it, there was something else. A longing. I hadn't spoken to Jacob since that night. Part of me wanted to reach out, to hear his voice, to feel his hands on me again. But I knew better. And yet, when I stepped outside to get the mail, he was there, leaning against his car, waiting. Our eyes met, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Not yet.